If you're in a Facebook group that's anything about RVs, I'm sure you've seen people with broken suspension pieces, especially the shackles and the leaf springs. Let me show you how I'm going to fix that problem so we don't have the same issue in our RV. So you know what I'm working with on the RV is a leaf spring shackles. There are two pieces of metal that hang down. Your leaf spring bolts in the middle of those. There's one each on your leaf spring. If you have two axles like we do, you have 3 shackles on each side of the RV. What happens is, as you're turning with the RV over time, it puts a lot of stress and fatigue in that metal, and eventually that weld will crack or break right on the top of that shackle. You've probably seen pictures of people with their shackles completely broken off. They have to get someone out to weld them up. They put extra bracing on top of those shackles, and then they're good to go after that. I'm trying to prevent that problem before it happens. I looked at some newer models of RVs. They have a brace that goes at a diagonal from the frame through the shackle and back up. It's one piece of metal, just like this. I'm going to weld this inside of the shackle onto the frame on each side, provide some strength, support, so over time our metal doesn't get fatigued and our shackles stay attached to the frame and attached to the leaf springs like they should be. I went to my local steel shop and had this metal bent. It is 1/4 inch thick metal, 2 inches wide. They cut it at 7 inches long and bent it in the middle at 90 degrees, and that worked out perfect for my shackles. You will need 6 pieces of metal bent. There is 3 shackles on each side of the RV with our 2-axle setup. So what's going to happen, I need to grind a little bit off the side of this so it can fit on the inside of the shackle. Each one's a little bit different in diameter, so each one will be a custom grind. And then basically it'll be like this inside of the shackle. There'll be a weld on here to the frame, each side of the shackle and each way. Then it'll support it a lot closer to where the leaf spring bolts on. When you're welding on the RV, you need to prep the setup first. I jacked it up, took all the tires off, put some blocks on so it's stabilized. My leveling jacks are down so the RV is not going to move when I'm working on it. The propane line runs near one of the axles, so I removed some zip ties on that so I can move it over, move the foam out of the way, so it's not going to be fire hazards. We need to protect the plastic and the propane line and the areas that are around we're going to be welding. So I took some metal, I cut it and bent it so I can make some little heat shields and move them around as I'm welding or grinding in those areas. The underbelly plastic needs to be moved back as well because we're going to be a little wider stance where our shackles are going to be welded onto now. To remove the nails that go through, you need a chisel and a hammer. You slowly work around them. They either will pull out or they'll break them off. And then you can trim the plastic back once you fit the shackle in place so you're not going to weld through the plastic. Once I am finished, I'll replace these nails with some screws and washers to hold the underbelly back in place. It makes it a little bit easier to remove the underbelly a little bit further. That way you can tuck a heat shield around it, and that way you're not melting your plastic during the welding process. Every shackle is a little bit different, so the grinding on each one, I need to slowly grind a little bit off. It was around the 16th of an inch I ground off of each piece of metal. Once I fit the shackle in place, I took a paint pen to mark where I needed to grind the paint off. That way I can weld metal on metal. On the first side, I removed the axle bolts completely, so that way the shackles are hanging down. What happened was when I clamped the metal in between when I welded it, it made it a little bit too small. I had to struggle to get the leaf springs and the bolts back in place. What I found out worked much better is on the other side, just to loosen the nuts up on the bolts a little bit that go through the shackles. That way I put the metal in place and I snug the bolts back up to hold the metal so I can weld it, and then I finish tightening after I welded everything in place. Either way, you want to remove all the grease and dirt and debris, that way you have a clean surface to weld onto. Before I get ready to weld, I turned off the propane tanks to reduce the risk of fire. Also, when you're welding, it can put a current through the ground of the RV, so I turned off the batteries to reduce the risk of electrical damage. Also, to make sure, I turned off the AC power pedestal and unplugged the cord going to the RV. After everything was welded, I put a little paint on the areas that had bare metal to keep it from rusting. I did go through afterwards and painted the entire area all one color, just because I like things to look really nice. Once I finished up with all the painting, I put our new G-rated tires on. If you want to see why I went with those tires, I'll put the link to the video down in the description. If you want to see more how-to videos like this, check out this playlist next.